Welcome to the 2024 Senior Studio Art Major panel discussion. This is our first time offering a panel discussion. We typically have more talks, but we're trying something new this year. And I'm excited to speak with each of you a little bit about your practice. I'm David Matteson, by the way. I'm the Associate Curator of Education here at the Rollins Museum of Art. And we'll have each of the student artists introduce themselves and their practice. But before I do, I just want to encourage you to spend some time in the exhibition. I'm hoping we've all had a chance to engage with the exhibition. We do have some slides, but also to take a look at and listen to the audio guide we've produced. You can scan the QR code on the back of this audio guide or on the back of this card, which will take you to recordings that each of the students has created in response to the work that they have on view. The panel discussion is going to take part in a couple of different parts here. We're going to have an introduction. They're each going to share a little bit about their work and how they kind of came to this kind of final embodiment for the exhibition. So I'm going to ask each of our artists to share a little bit about their course of study here at Rollins, about the body of work that they've created for this exhibition as we are, and also tell us a little bit about your plans for graduation. This is your capstone experience, so you will be moving on from here. We're going to start with Katie.
Hello, I'm Catarine Marchione. I'm a studio art major. My minor is called temporary teacher certification minor, which is basically like secondary education minor. So I plan to become a teacher after graduation, teaching at secondary level. My work is about my experiences and dreams as they surround the suicide of my father. I tell my story through my paintings, which often depict rooms made strange and ghostly figures. I explore themes of communication with the dead, denial, religion, and people pleasing as they surround grief. And future plans, I plan to attend an art residency in the summer at Rambarran School of Arts and Crafts, taking a ceramics class. I'm excited about that because it's something out of my comfort zone. And again, I'd like to become a teacher at the secondary level. I plan to move to the St. Pete area. And I'm excited to become a teacher, and I'm looking forward to having my students be very reflective and expressive with their work. I'm in an internship right now at Lake Nona High School, and I got to practice this a lot and through my lessons, and I'm excited to do that even more when I become a teacher.
Hi, I'm Ms. McBride. I'm a senior here at Rollins. I have a major in studio art and a minor in sexuality, women, and gender studies. So my art explores the way in which women are taught to view romantic and self-love. So through installation, I'm representing the childhood bedroom of my character Daisy to expose the way seemingly innocuous objects associated with girlhood can perpetuate cycles of harm. And I've always taken an interest in having a feminist approach to my art, as well as my extracurriculars. I've been active through Planned Parenthood and other arts in the greater Orlando community. So once I graduate, I will be doing a residency at Airmont with Katie, studying ceramics. And then I will be moving to Devon, England to get my master's in creative arts and education at the University of Exeter. And I'm just really excited to continue to learn and grow as a student, but also as a future educator and as an artist.
Hi, I'm Emily Rambarran, and I'm a studio art major, no minor, but my works are a reflection of my connection to my culture, which is Guyanese culture, and also the role of women in that culture. And by doing this, I sort of look into objects that connect with the culture and specifically my family, kind of to learn more about my role in my culture and more about the culture itself, because I feel like objects are a very important way to connect to cultures. Like clothing and food hold a lot of value to different cultures and a lot of people within that culture. And my plans after graduation is to work for about a year before going off to grad school to study art therapy at FSU. Hopefully that's the plan. But Yeah, because I'm really drawn to that field because I feel like younger kids, especially with communication issues like myself, it's kind of hard to get your ideas across and kind of talk about how you feel versus when you put it out on a piece of paper with drawings or even scribbles, it still holds meaning like when you speak it verbally. So I want to encourage children to be able to get their feelings and thoughts across that way. Yeah.
My name is Lachey. I'm a studio art major and a secondary education minor, the temporary. And after graduation, I would like to go on to be a teacher as well as continue my art practice. My work explores themes of identity, childhood, and self-esteem. And through my entire senior capstone, I was kind of working on just rediscovering myself and my identity through my past childhood experiences. So a lot of my paintings, well, all of them reflect experiences that I've had growing up, and I just kind of represent it that way. Like I said, I plan on becoming a teacher. I want to work in Orange County, hopefully in middle school, but maybe high school. And I also want to continue my art practice, and really want to experiment with incorporating like African American or Black figures in my work, and then of course applying for like grants and art shows, everything like that.
Thank you all. So I'd like each of you to share a little bit about this journey that you have been on for the past year. So it is a rigorous process of discovery and refinement. And the final juried exhibition really begins about a year ago with your junior portfolio review. After you successfully defend that portfolio, you're admitted into the coursework, into the senior capstone experience. And you work with the studio art faculty to develop their concept and their technical abilities. They go through a number of critiques with faculty, with their peers, and with museum staff. And they also exhibit their work in a previous exhibition in the fall. You have a Midway show at the Cornell Fine Arts Center next door, where many of the works turn into or are further refined and edited into the works that you have on view here at the museum. And so I'm curious about that process and how you have overcome some of the hurdles or challenges that you faced throughout the year. How did you refine your work into this current expression?
Regarding challenges,
Just one quick note. Sorry, we do have process shots that we're going to show you here along the way. Sorry, Katie. A little louder, sure. If we could just speak up a little bit. Katie is showing us some paintings of you on the screen.
regarding challenges, I think that something I struggle with a little bit is like worrying about failure. So I think that sometimes I struggled with not necessarily wanting to paint because I didn't want to have a perceived failure of like on myself. So sometimes I don't feel like I always gave myself the opportunity to succeed by sometimes like waiting till the last minute, things like that. But sometimes I'd often let my paintings sit and then I would come back to them later. I still struggle with this at times, but sometimes I just need to give myself pep talks to kind of change my own mindset on it and have pep talks from other people to kind of just remind myself that, failure is really, that's not, I think failure is like maybe not really a thing in a way, and also not giving up, kind of thing. But yeah, I try to remind myself of the mindset that it's about liking what you do and having fun and at least doing something like just starting a painting and then getting over that fear.
And Katie, could you just share a little bit about the images you have up here, and how they are indicative of that process of failure?
I think, well, I would often start with a sketch of my work, and those are usually based off of dreams or memories and experiences I've had, like a combination. And I would usually include some kind of like automatic drawing symbolism sort of thing, like whatever I felt like drawing, I would draw. And sometimes there would be like meaning like right away, and then I would find meaning later. Sometimes that happened that way. And then yeah, regarding these process photos, they go my paintings, go through different stages. And sometimes I, like you can see with this, I had my painting it looked different when I even thought it was done. But I went back later and changed it for this final exhibition because sometimes we change our minds. And
So for mine, I kind of went into my junior portfolio review very kind of fixated on book arts. I think I've always, ever since joining Rollins and being introduced to book arts, I found that that narrative quality to the form was really important to me because I like to tell stories in that way. And a lot of my art has kind of come from ideas of characters or environments that I kind of created based off of reality. And so I started with the book, but over time, I found that I was making a lot of books that were different. They didn't align thematically, and I was having so much difficulty kind of figuring out how I wanted to do that, especially because I was working with issues that are really important to me and trying to connect my gender studies minor to what I was discussing. So that was the big, discussion in my critiques was, okay, but how are we going to unify this? How are we going to make everything cohesive? And I found that before winter break, I started thinking about installation. I had registered for Audrey's installation class, and I realized that that was a way for me to connect the things I was doing with video art and photography and book arts and make it something that I felt really did depict what I was trying to do. And it still has so much of that narrative quality to it, especially with installation. Like I had to start with an idea and a character. And so the pictures up here that's a picture from the fall exhibition, and it's two of the books I made, and those are the books that started the entire idea for the piece that I have in this final exhibition, where I had this idea of a fairy tale book that was very much based in purity, and then a book that represented a person who had grown up with that book, and so that kind of idea of what are the consequences. And so then when I went into this, okay, how can I do this through video art and installation to make it more cohesive? I still wanted that element of the book because that's not something that's very much important to the overall story. I mean, I'm talking about fairy tales, I'm talking about these ideas that you learn when you're in childhood. And so I took the photos and images from the video and all these different ideas that were so not together, and I put them with an old fairy tale book from my childhood and mapped it out as thematic. So when you're looking through the book in the installation, it's not necessarily very like it's not obvious what is happening, but that's the point. To me, it is very narrative and it has that quality because of my process. The narrative itself is very process based. And so it kind of all came together and set the stage for the installation, which is the representation of my character's bedroom. So that's kind of, and the child.
Emily?
For me, I feel like my my challenges at the beginning were definitely pacing myself and finding out what exactly I wanted to do with my work. I started off doing like digital prints, digital drawings, and printing them out with the topic of fear, which is very broad, I feel like. And I guess throughout critiques and seeing my peers' works, I wanted to do something more personal because fear can be personal, but it's a very broad topic that can apply to literally anything. And seeing how people make their works very personal, I wanted to do that for myself, but the only thing that I could think of was, I guess, culture and identity. So I went that direction. Not so much fear related anymore, maybe stress kind of. And I switched from digital to painting because it allowed me to work on multiple works at once. I think for me, doing digital pieces, it's very easy to get sucked into one thing because I notice all of the imperfections and I can go in and fix it. And sometimes seeing the mistakes, I feel like, well, do I even want to keep doing this because it looks bad, basically. But working with paintings, I feel like it was a lot easier to start one thing and then move on to something else without worrying because you can't alter a painting as easily as you can a digital image. And my process shots, I try to kind of keep it similar to my digital drawing methods of using layers. I mean, it's very different, but starting with a background layer and using thin watered down paint to kind of go over one layer and then another layer to kind of build up an image, kind of like how I did digitally, to kind of, I guess, get a feel for what I'm doing. I would like to refine this a lot more because I will be working on painting throughout my time after graduation. So hopefully I'll get a method down. But yeah, that's one of the biggest things that I've struggled with. And I think I came pretty far from the beginning of the year to now. So I'm happy with my progress.
I'll speak up a little bit. Yeah.
Sorry.
For me, one of my biggest like challenges was the integration of textile elements into my work. Because what I struggle with is like I had a vision of what I wanted my paintings to look like, but I was working like my ideas revolved around really like domestic scenes and like realistic scenes and everything like that. So like I would start from trying to represent those scenes and then adding the textile elements later, and I felt like it was hard to integrate them in it like very cohesively. Like it felt very like forced, and like the colors, the textures, like yarn, beads. It felt very like forced, and like it wasn't like it was just there. It wasn't like like combined in my painting. So that was like my biggest struggle, and what made me realize that I had like how I figured out how to go about that was kind of starting from an underpainting. And what I do is I would just kind of layer a bunch of colors on a canvas. I would add different textures. Just there's not really a plan. It's kind of like a feel. And then after that, I would adapt those colors and like shapes and the movements from the underpainting in the final concept in order to make it look cohesive. I feel like that made it easier for me to incorporate like all the elements that I wanted to into one painting, because there's a lot of different elements and just like mediums that I would use, and it would just, yeah, it just wouldn't look as cohesive.
Actually, can I ask you a question? I'm going to go back to the final
Mhm.
section here. So you can get a sense of the tactile nature of your paintings. So there's fabric elements included here and yarn element there. Um, eh, Thinking about maybe your layering process, and one thing that strikes me in your artist statement is that you say that it's less about the final product for you, it's much more about the process. And so when do you feel a sense of resolution with these works? When are you finally
When
with this layering?
when the deadline comes, like I don't know, I never feel like finished. Like even that one, I feel like I still could add more because I don't know. Like I don't know. I feel like there's always something that I could add, but then I'm just kind of learning to like accept the simplicity of things. Like with sisters, that was a big challenge for me because yes, because I feel like it looks good, it looks fine, but I feel like I could have added more, but like you don't always need more. And I feel like how I ended up incorporating everything and like simplifying some of the shapes and the figures, I feel like that it kind of represents the message I'm trying to kind of send through the painting, as opposed to it being more like heavy with like textiles and stuff.
Okay. Well, I want to talk with, so now we're going to really open up to more of a discussion of some of the shared ideas that we collectively have talked about within your works. And one of those is this idea of identity, or just approaching identity and how we construct identity, whether that's through personal experiences or cultural, social influences. And in our pre-meetings for this panel, we talked a lot about girlhood as a notion, as a concept of identity, and how each of you has approached that uniquely. Well, certainly very unique aesthetic sensibilities, but the shared kind of common interests in an understanding of girlhood and grappling with this kind of transitional phase, I think, into womanhood as well. And so I'm curious if you could, Liz, maybe start us off with talking about your fictional character Daisy, how you conceptualized her, how your studies in the Sexuality, Women's, and Gender Studies program has also influenced your perception or your ideas about this character, and also maybe a little bit of the voyeurism of looking into this character's bedroom and having that fictional book that tells her story as well. Could you just share a little bit more?
So I think, for one, I think everyone's relationship and understanding of girlhood is so vastly different. And I think that our exhibition does kind of highlight that. I think for me, Daisy really represents the culmination of not just myself and my own experiences, but a lot of the experiences of my friends and the women around me, and my mom and so many women that we've talked about. There's this little thing that connects you as a woman, and it's that idea of sexuality and how other people's view of you plays into that identity. And so that voyeurism is really important to me because it's not something that you can necessarily get rid of in your, girlhood. And there's this level, I would say nefariousness, or kind of like there's this level of kind of negativity that comes hidden within so many different objects or fairy tales that we read or listen to or grew up with. But there's also this level of positivity as well. And so Daisy to me represents that gray area of it's not necessarily something that's inherently bad or good. There's just this level of identity of yourself that you don't get to create for yourself, that's created for you. And I think that Daisy represents that kind of idea of understanding. There's different understandings of love and gender and innocence, and it's infused within our own understandings of ourselves. And so Daisy, having the bedroom and having it be such that personal space, it's very much this idea of, you don't know everything, and you don't know everything about your own self either. And there's just kind of this element of, your identity connects to your idea of your worthiness. And if your identity has been kind of shaped by other people, what does that say as well? And so I don't know, there was a lot of things that I've been thinking about through my minor, and kind of thinking about myself as an educator in the future, and thinking about young children and how these ideas and these feminist theories have kind of played into my understanding of gender. And I think that Daisy really, for me, was a good way to kind of round out my college experience and understanding, viewing how I see myself in my own relationship to girlhood and my own childhood, and then thinking about that, in the future as well.
So I want to ask a follow-up here. Then. So is Daisy your perception of an alter ego, or is she an embodiment of yourself? There's each of you is also grappling with vulnerability in an interesting way. I want to build that into a question for Emily as well, in terms of your kind of influences of cultural heritage and how that also influenced your understanding of yourself and how vulnerable you wanted to be with these paintings. But I'm going to start with Liz here. So how did you conceive of her?
She's not me necessarily, but there's so much of her that is me. And the objects in the installation are from my childhood bedroom, and there's so much of her that I see in myself, but there's so much of her that I have gotten from my friends, and like hearing stories of themselves, and then family members and situations that people have been in relationships, or through the courses of their lives, and even grandparents. And that is so much. There's little bits of Daisy and little stories that I have for her. I even made like a playlist, and like each element is from someone else, but she's so kind of like personal to me, and I think she does in some way represent my inner child and that version of myself that I grew up loving Pink and all these fairy tales. I grew up loving all those things, and I still do. And I don't think that Daisy doesn't love them, but there's still that level of like uncomfortableness that she has in herself, and that you can kind of tell from elements of the piece. So I don't know if that answers your question on who Daisy is, but yeah.
Well, it leads into another question also about objects and how objects can tell stories about our identities and represent elements of our identity. And that's something that comes through in Emily's work. So Emily, you are looking at still lives. Really, you have a portrait in this self-portrait in this selection. Go to it here. But primarily still lives. And so how those objects represent Guyanese culture. And you also talk about how the pressures you have felt, or maybe the tensions you've felt between what you call in your artist statement an American girl identity versus your cultural heritage, and how you feel a sense of tension between those two. And so I'm curious if you could just maybe enlighten us a little bit more about the choice of objects that you've included in these still life paintings, and how you're kind of grappling with that sense of identity through your subject matter, through your aesthetic sensibility as well.
So through my research of Guyanese culture and like talking to my mom even, it's, I guess, stereotypical gender roles are heavily enforced in that culture still even today. I mean, it still is like even in America, but I feel like it's more intense in like third world countries like Guyana. And women are very much expected to do things like cook and wash the laundry and stuff at the age of 10, even though, there are adults in the house. That's kind of put on them from a very young age to sort of teach them like, well, this is what you're going to be doing when you grow up. You're going to be doing this for your family. And that's kind of like when I talked to my mom about it, she told me that growing up, she felt like she couldn't really live for herself. And I wanted to kind of put that in a portrait because I felt for me, I kind of felt the same way because it's even though now in America, my mom tries to be different from how her parents raised her, it's still kind of there like, I want you to do this because I was raised this way and you're also going to grow up this way kind of thing. So putting that sort of, I guess, stress and pressure on a child, it's hard to break away from when it's been rooted in your culture for so long. So that's kind of what I wanted to portray with these objects and the self-portrait, kind of that expression like you're going to learn how to cook this, you're going to learn how to do this kind of laundry, fold the clothes, take care of the jewelry, take care of the house, clean. But you're young, you don't have to really be doing that, live your normal American childhood. But that's kind of what I wanted to get at with that. So kind of, I guess, breaking away from that job, that pressure of the gender roles being put on a young girl is also what I wanted to touch on, but more specifically to that culture.
So it is culturally specific, but then you also include the flower painting. Can you talk a little bit about what influenced that choice?
Yeah, so the flower, that's the national flower of the country, the white water lily, and it's supposed to represent like purity, life, kind of, I guess, what women are supposed to be seen as, like pure, fertile, whatever. And I wanted to portray them as wilting because these stereotypes are harming women. Like it's very obviously harming women in this country and other countries, and kind of portraying something that's supposed to be pure and full of life as wilting and dying as a result of these pressures put on them. It's sort of supposed to speak on what's happening to women as well.
And earlier in the year, you were looking at a lot of Vanitas paintings as well. So those paintings still lives that often include flowers as a reminder of mortality. So there's a kind of Western tradition and history that you're also navigating here through your choice of painting. So we'll move from this idea of cultural specificity, but also kind of navigating the universal to Katie's work, which, Katie, your work, which you said earlier, it's inspired by dreams. There is something very, despite the fact that it's autobiographical, there's some level of autobiographic qualities to this piece or to these works. There's something very universal to them as well in terms of grappling with mourning, the loss of your father. And I'm curious if maybe you could talk a little bit about navigating that space, or navigating your approach to symbolism, what symbols you include, how important it is for the viewer to be able to interpret those as specific to your experience, but also ones that maybe pull at us, pull at a universal, kind of more human chord. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So thinking about like the universal versus the specific, that's something that I kind of thought about a lot through my process. Like if something is too personal, will people understand what I am trying to say, what I'm trying to get at? But looking at my work now, I think it's a good balance between the two. Like I think it's a combination. It is more personal, but I do think that I try to include some universal symbols, and sometimes these symbols that are personal to me are also personal to other people. Like, for example, people dream about teeth falling out a lot, and it seems very weird to like dream about, but like a lot of people do. So that's just an example. But I think some of my work, is ambiguous with like ghosts and red cardinals, those are often associated with people who have passed. But regarding like the choice to be more specific and more personal, I think that was an important thing for me to do because I never really, when I lost my dad in high school, I didn't really talk about it for a while, really until I came to college. I didn't even really tell my friends that my dad had passed away until weeks after. So it's important, I think, for me to tell my story in a very personal way. Um, and just, we all have our own stories, and I think it could be encouraging for viewers to tell their own personal story, especially about um, this topic, because I think it's very, it's very taboo. Like I mean, death in general, but like specifically suicide, I think is a very taboo topic. And again, I think even if symbols aren't universally understood, people bring their own interpretations um, to it. And I hope that, when my viewers see my work, maybe they feel less alone and maybe they feel inspired to share their own story regarding something if they've been through something similar, be more vulnerable.
So it's funny there to the therapeutic aspect of your work with this idea that art can be therapeutic in nature, telling our own story, and something like you said earlier about wanting to do that with your students too when you move into an art educator role after graduating. And Lachey, you're also interested in education and serving as an art educator. And I'm curious, you talk a lot about your statement, this idea of memories and how memories serve as the building blocks for our identity. And there's something about the way that you phrase that in the statement that makes me aware of how we construct knowledge in learners. And so I'm curious if, like Katie, your process informs your perspective about education, your pedagogical approach to being an art educator, how you'll work with students in the future.
I think for me, my process and how I go into a work, I think that's like where my ambition for being a teacher and like kind of comes from. Because for me, like I said, it's not about necessarily the end product. It's more so about what goes into like the work of art or whatever we're doing, sculpture, painting, drawing, anything. I feel like it's more so the process, the thought process, how a student can explain it, where they get the ideas from, and how they kind of reflect on the outcome of their work. I feel like that is like the most valuable aspect of art and like of creating a piece. And that's kind of what kind of inspired me more to want to teach. If that makes
No, absolutely. And I also think something that happens in your audio guide, Lachey, where you're walking us through this piece, Bedroom Oasis, and talking about how you want the viewer to look closely at some of the elements, but also kind of shift backwards, walking us through this kind of perception of a shift, maybe in terms of how you see this piece as inviting and colorful, but also an expression of something much deeper. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about that work on the bedroom piece here?
Yeah, so Bedroom Oasis is basically about how it kind of started off more superficial as because I'm reflecting on my memories. So I was reflecting on how I, spend a lot of time in my room and I love my room and I just love decorating and everything like that. So that's like my safe space, my oasis, my bedroom. And then like as I kind of went on, I started to be like, okay, why is that, And then I feel like it's kind of because, growing up, like my like house, has some like toxic stuff, tension. And so self-isolation kind of became a coping mechanism of mine. So it's like I feel like that's why I relate so much to my room and kind of like creating my own little space that I can feel comfortable in and decompress in. And I wanted to represent that in my work, but I also wanted to kind of mask the real meaning behind it in a way because I feel like growing up, I like my family, like communication really wasn't something that was really practiced. So there would be stuff going on, but from the outside, it wouldn't really look like it like at all. So I kind of wanted to like hide that in my work and I incorporated different like a lot of like hard texture pieces, like the road is very, very textured, stuff like that to kind of represent like the struggles that I went through. And like I just didn't want it to like look like how look like what it represented, but it's also still represents, you know what I mean? It has like two different meanings, but you don't notice one unless you actually look closer and go into there. And I wanted to separate it into different sections because, like I have like the floor, not the floor, but like the sidewalk, the crosswalk, sorry, and then the bedroom, closet area, and then you have the tree area. So there's like different sections that you can point to that kind of can reveal something, cannot. And then when you step back, it's like you see it as a whole. It's kind of like a resolution in a way.
So going back to this idea of maybe how much do you reveal, how much do you conceal,
Mhm.
and where you find resolution. So you actually started in a similar space where Katie had ended. Katie, you have a first-person perspective here, where the viewer is meant to be in the space of the bed. We're supposed to imagine that we're playing in the bed, looking onto the scene. And Lachey, you actually started the year with paintings like this kind of first-person perspective. And I'm curious when that kind of shift happened for you in terms of vulnerability, away from first-person perspective, how much you are maybe concealing in your works, or what were you doing? Final kind of
Yeah. Like when I started to break away from the first person, it's because I wanted to be more specific and kind of symbolize what these memories actually mean. So in the first half of my capstone, I was really just recreating memories and kind of leaving the real meaning up to interpretation. But then I started wanting to like actually like like work on myself and like actually figure out what it actually means. So it's not just revisiting memories to figure out my identity, but it's also like I'm actually doing what I said I'm trying to do, and I'm representing that in my work instead of just representing the memories that I'm referencing. So I kind of strayed away from the first person aspect in order to adapt like more like symbolism in my work.
And Katie, you landed here on these first-person paintings. This is one of them. This piece is called Circus House. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how you're thinking about perspective as a painter and the way that you're rendering space?
Well, I think that regarding space and kind of like setting maybe like the paintings, I think a lot of my paintings ended up being of interior spaces, sometimes even the same space, and often like in rooms, kind of like made strange. Um,
So can you tell us how this one is made strange?
yes.
How did you go about that idea?
So a lot of it, what's contained in this painting is actually how my room looked, but then there's other aspects that aren't really true to reality. And like I think that also brings up an interesting idea of like perception of memory and just how things might change. Like that clown on the right, the swinging clown, that was really in my room, and that's weird. But my room wasn't really pink, and then also like those aren't my bed sheets, but I made them that way.
So what influenced the choice of the pink here? Pink is dominant throughout.
Yes, it is. And I can't really say that that's something that I put a lot of thought into. Like I wasn't necessarily like, oh, let me make this room pink for a particular reason. I think that I just kind of, there are certain decisions that I made without very clear intention. And I think sometimes, and I do that sometimes with some of my things, and then I go back later and realize, oh, maybe this means something. Like maybe there is meaning here, right? Like assigning meaning later on. But there are some things that I don't really necessarily know why I did it the way like that.
Yeah. I am also kind of curious, thank you, about this kind of sense of community that you have built among the four of you. So it's a small cohort this year too, I would say, comparatively to past classes. But maybe affordance of that is that you are able to cultivate a real sense of community among one another. and how you'll kind of maintain that sense of community, how that's influenced the choices that you've made along the way, but also how you'll maintain that sense of community as you move forward. And I'm also kind of thoughtful of the fact that there are really few students who are going on for junior portfolio review and about to enter into this year-long process of discovery. So if you want to give some advice about that as well, before we open up for audience Q&A too.
I feel like the community aspect of this year has been one of the most important things for me, especially having the studio space itself and being able to talk to my fellow classmates and just get that kind of, that there's this special thing about knowing that we're going through the same thing, but we're all seeing things in different ways and we're all learning different things, and we have conversations that really shift our understanding of, oh, maybe this is something I should lean into, or oh, maybe this is a good idea, I didn't think it was, maybe I should leave that behind and I don't need to work on it right now. So I think that there's just like a validation that naturally comes from being in a space like this. But I also think that, like, at least for me in particular, collaboration and community is a huge part of what I think is my favorite part of art. And I think that having this kind of creative space has made me really crave extending that into my graduate school life, and then, you know, through and through after that as well. And so I've kind of learned to really value areas of my life where I naturally have a community and I naturally can kind of dip into those spaces because I think it's so necessary. And there's so much that when we started our JPR, we were like, oh, I can't even imagine us having an exhibition. Like, what will it all look like? How will it work together? But we walk into the space now and it makes so much sense. There is so much about it that really connects. And I think that it has happened because we've had that space to really kind of be vulnerable with each other and allow ourselves to get into that, to like dip into that and not be scared of it. And so there's that validation and also that kind of allowing of. So that's how I feel about it.
Sure. Sure, if you want to. Yeah, you don't have to all answer. We can change.
I think the most important part of that aspect for me was just how supportive everyone was of each other and encouraging, like, between us and then faculty. I feel like for me it was really important to hear that, like, something that I was doing was like good, that, like, I don't know, like having reassurance in that sense, and then just being able to reassure each other and be like, yeah, that's a really good idea, and like helping each other build off of it and see things, different perspectives that maybe I hadn't thought of. So that was something that was rewarding to me.
And how will you all maintain that? Is that something you're thinking about? I mean, so Liz and Katie are both going to Aramont for a studio residency for a week. So that's another kind of community building opportunity. But how else will you kind of cultivate a sense of community, or if that's important at all? I don't know, Emily or Lachey, want to think about that or answer that?
A community with each other or just in general?
I think in general it depends. I mean, how
Yeah.
is it for you to have your peers
I think
throughout this process?
I think it was very important for me because just being able to see everyone's process and like what they went through and how everyone was so like open to change. And I feel like after graduation, like how I would want to build my community is like getting in contact with like other people in the same similar field. You know, I have like some friends, like one of my friends, Gabby, she's a teacher. So we're like connecting in that way. And I hope to kind of build that kind of community after graduation. I'm kind of starting now. And that's kind of, yeah, that's like how I would.
Oh, that's all right. Well, we will open up to audience Q&A, and I'll repeat the question back so that people online can hear it too. But does anyone have questions for
You talked a little bit about how you chose the title. What were some of the discussions and the consideration to elect this title?
The question is about the title of the work, or the title of the exhibition, As We Are, and how they arrived at it. Somebody want to answer that question? You want to go?
I'll go first and you can add on. Okay. So as we are, we were kind of thinking about how all of our works kind of have a conversation about identity. And it's not like, I don't know how to explain. Like, it's not like we're necessarily building upon our identity. It's like we're kind of explaining it and revisiting our experiences with different aspects of our life. So it's kind of like as we are, like it's not a question, it's a statement. Like we're telling you something as a, in that kind of way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had talked about that idea a lot. And so coming up with an idea, like a title was something like we had looked at all these different examples and we had done all these different writing ideas. And I remember just writing out all these different phrases. And so there was ideas like, okay, do we say who we are? Or like, how do we do that? And then when we finally decided on as we are, it was a question of how do we want to depict that? Do we want it to be in all caps, or do we want it to have a period, or do we want it to have something else with that? And I think the simplicity of it and just having it be as we are is what is so like, I don't know, to me it's very relaxing and calming. Like this is who we are right now, as we are. And I don't know, there's a vulnerability that comes with that statement as well.
Mhm. Any other questions? Yeah.
I wanted to ask this like for all of you. Because in all of your pieces, I feel like there's something I noticed that like really stands out to me. And I wanted to ask you guys if there was like anything within the process of creating these final projects that maybe kind of sparked you to like build around that, or if it was more of just like you had a well-rounded idea that you wanted to flesh out.
So how did they arrive at this like central concept and
Yes.
build on that? Is the question. Okay. Do you want to just go down the line then?
I don't know if this is like necessarily like answering, but like when you said that, I made me think about how I chose to use like sheet ghosts example, like that example in some of my work, and my dad's only really depicted in like one of my paintings, like in his human form. And I think like I was saying before, that's very like it provides like an ambiguous narrative, but I think that decision specifically made sense for me, especially because of the way I grieved, just feeling detached from it for a long time and not talking about it. So it made sense for me. And that's something that I didn't like decide to do going into the idea, but once I started doing that, like, okay, I want to keep doing this, and I liked doing paintings, including that.
I feel like, I don't know, the central idea maybe, or the thing that I really found myself always going to, no matter what the different piece was, is that idea of childhood, or, even just in my JPR, I was thinking of, okay, Valentine's with children and all these different ideas of childhood. And then I got more specific with that idea of girlhood, and then even more specific when I went home for winter break, thinking about in my old childhood bedroom and taking objects from that and books and things. And so that kind of, and then I always wanted it to resemble some sort of fairy tale. So there's that whimsical kind of the specific colors and tone that everything I kind of created has taken. And I think that's why it has become so cohesive, is because of those ideas that I started out with. So
For me, getting to this idea, I feel like it was a lot of research and looking at other artists and kind of having like an amalgamation of ideas and then refining it and kind of being like, well, I want this version of this version of this, until something felt right. And then I took that and just went with it. So nothing too crazy about that process, but yeah.
For me, how I ended up with my like overall concept, it mainly had to do with like comfortability, because I knew from my JPR that I wanted to do something that's a bit more personal that would help me understand myself. I think like at first I was going to do about like my experiences with like mental health and anxiety, but I'm like, do I want to represent that? Would I be comfortable speaking about that and digging deep into that aspect? And so I was kind of thinking of ways that I could address that while also, but like in a different way that's a little bit less personal. But if I wanted to dig deeper into it through my work, I could have that option too. So yeah, like comfortability was like a big aspect of why I chose the route that I did.
What advice do you have for artists that aren't formally trained or educated like you are?
Okay, so I'll repeat that back for online. That is, what advice do you have for artists that are have not had this experience like you have, not receiving formal training and going through maybe this practice together, this shared coursework? And any of you can answer. We don't have to go down the line.
Katie, do you want to go or no? just make art and then also watch other artists and just also I this isn't really reference the question, but like just make art, but also make art with no expectations. I feel like that is something that people don't value as much. I feel like it's important to like get inspiration from other artists, but if you're like trying to find yourself and become your own person, your own artist, I feel like it's important to train like independently, but also make art without any expectations. Because I feel like that's when I'm most successful and how I developed myself and kind of found my style and myself as an artist. Without
Well,
having
Shay, I just want to also say, we've been to your studio quite prolific. You've worked very, very quickly with because her stacked with canvases in your studio. And so, for some, though, there might be a bit of a fear of the blank page. Katie, you brought that up earlier. And so getting past that anxiety, if you have advice for artists, within the formal structure of a class like this, you have deadlines and expectations of what you are to turn in. But maybe working outside of the academy, how do you maintain that momentum, Lachey?
I guess like commenting on the fear of like blank space. I think that's why my underpaintings are so important for me because it kind of gives me an anchor point, but like you don't really have to have a plan when going into it. It just kind of develops as you keep going. It's like I don't know how to explain it, but it's like a key that like triggers something in your mind and like gives you ideas as you keep going.
And I would also say you work at different scales too. So you went through a ton of small, how many you ended up making, but these small 2x2s studies. So just continuing to work. It's interesting about underpainting. Anyone else maybe about those anxieties or without the formal structure? How do you maintain the momentum?
I think to go on the kind of community aspect again, there's something so important about finding like-minded people and kind of holding each other accountable. So being like, okay, let's both work on something and we'll share it together, or let's work on something together. I do that with my best friend. We work on projects together, and that keeps us going and moving, and it keeps us growing. And having that conversation in that environment, you don't have to have formal critiques like we were having, but to invite your friends over and be like, let's have juice and let's talk about my art. Like that's fun, and I think that that's really accessible to everyone. So it's about finding the time, and if that's something you really want to do, you don't have to be in a school environment to find that community.
Mm-hmm. So we'll close over time with maybe one closing question. And so thinking about how you are at this transitional point in your careers as artists, I'm going to borrow this question from the curator, Hans Ulrich Oberst, which is, what is one dream you have yet to realize?
For me, it's going to be important for me to get to a place where I feel fully confident in myself as an artist, but just as a person in general. I think that's something that I really want to work on as I start the next chapter of my life, feeling secure in the things I do, taking care of myself with love and compassion, kind of thing. And then and like there's like this. I was doing this like activity the other day with like working on the future me and like what I expect for myself in the future and what I want to see. And I came into like three C's, like three words that start with like the letter C that are going to be important for me, and just being consistent, confident, and content. Just those are the three things that I want to work on.
That's beautiful.
I feel like mine's kind of specific, but I want to continue to collaborate with people. And so I've collaborated with poets and dancers. I would love to collaborate with a musician. I'd love to do some sort of video art or installation with music. I think that would be so cool. I could come up with a million ideas. So that's like a dream I have yet to realize, is to introduce music to my collaboration group. So
And another C word.
collaborate.
Love it. Keep it going, Emily.
I think mine's pretty basic, but it's location where I want to be after I finish grad school. Like I want to do art therapy, but like where would I really flourish in that occupation? I feel like here in Florida, I don't have a whole lot of opportunities in that field, but I haven't really thought about where I want to go afterwards. So I guess that's something that I really need to sit on. But yeah, yeah.
For me, I would really like to create opportunities for like young artists, and I mean like young, like middle school, high school, just expand the art community in general. I feel like there's a lot of advantages that a lot of people don't know or they take for granted, and I would really like to just create a space where that is welcome and taken more seriously in schools, especially. Yeah.
So creating safe spaces,
Yeah.
creating a community, and taking care of oneself. I think those are all beautiful dreams to focus on. We'll close it out here, but I will encourage all of you to spend time in the exhibition. Thank you all so much for sharing your work and sharing these insights with us today. As we are, it's open through May 12th, and this recording will come up soon online. So please keep an eye out for future programs here at RMA. Thank you all.